Today we're going to talk about evolutionary mechanisms. To understand that, we have to accept that evolution is a change of the gene pool over time. The gene pool is the group of genes that can be arranged in many different ways. It can happen with natural selection, sexual selection, genetic mutation, genetic drift, and genetic flow. Genetic drift is interesting because when these random events happen, they change the gene pool very quickly, and you can see the results in the next generation, if not the following generation. The cause of genetic drift can be two different occurrences, either bottleneck effect or founder's effect. Let's start with bottleneck effect. Bottleneck effect is the significant loss of genetic material in a very short amount of time, generally due to a natural occurrence or a man-made occurrence. These can be tornadoes, they can be large storms, earthquakes, or even genocide. This can change the different allele combinations very rapidly and cause the selection to be a lot less. The previous generation that you started with may have been a visible selection of brunettes, blondes, and redheads. After an event like an earthquake, you may suddenly lose most of your redheads, some of your brunettes, and all of your blondes. So the other kinds of evolutionary mechanisms, such as natural selection and sexual selection, have now been changed, bottlenecking the gene pool. The founder effect is also an example of genetic drift. This is when a small group leaves their population, forms a new group, essentially founding a new genetic gene pool. This can happen with emigration and immigration. An example of this is when a French population left their area in Paris, went and formed a new colony in New Canada, which then became Quebec. They were carrying a genetic mutation for degenerative diseases. Even though this was founded several hundred years ago, those genetic diseases are still appearing today because of the genetic drift of founder's effect. Another example was when a group of Dutch emigrated to South Africa, founding what is then the Afrikaner population. They were carrying a propensity for the Huntington's disease gene. Today, there is definitely a higher proportion of Huntington's disease in the Afrikaner population from all of those years ago, the Dutch founding their colony in South Africa. Founder genes are not just genotypes, which is the genetic makeup of a human, they are also phenotypes, which is what we can see. This is why now with transportation, technology, you see a lot of different people moving around the world, and some of that is you'll now see blonde Asians, you'll see red-headed, unicorns. Gene flow is another mechanism that can also affect the gene pool. That is when genes are taken from an area and taken over to another population. In nature, this can happen with a tree being either pollinated or blowing in the wind their seeds to another tree of the same species, but not the exact same genetic material. And all of a sudden, you see different trees with part of the genetic material coming from the first tree. In humans, we saw that when we had slaves at the beginning of America, and European genes are now being seen in the African American population because of the joining of two very different kind of gene pools. The difference is gene flow is an introduction of new alleles to the gene pool. Genetic drift is a change of alleles in the gene pool.